Hey everyone, it's Congresswoman Shigeto Tlaib. I'm the representative of Michigan's 13th district, which includes Detroit, one of the most influential music cities in the country. That's right, we not only birth movements around civil rights and labor rights, but we also are the birthplace of the most famous music movements in the history of the industry, like Motown, punk rock, techno, and more. So I'm super thrilled, incredibly so honored to be joined today by some very special musicians who themselves have made an impact in the music industry to talk about changes in it that they've seen and lived, the different kinds of changes in the streaming services, and something I've been a proponent of since growing up in a UIW family and household. It's also about unionization. So I'm pleased to be joined with mastering engineer Heba Kadry, an electric musician in Michigander, Shigeto, singer and songwriter Julia Holter, and last but not least, punk rocker and co-founder of Union of Musicians and Allied Workers, which you'll hear them call UMAW, Joey La Neve DeFrancesco. Thank you for all of the musicians again for joining me today to really talk about things that, again, many folks don't know behind the scenes what is happening to many of our neighbors and folks in the music industry. We've only have 45 minutes and a lot to talk about, so let's get right to it. Many, if not all of you, have been making music for years, long before the onset of this horrible pandemic, COVID-19 public health crisis. So I want to ask, maybe start with you, Zach. What is the general state of things at the moment for the music industry? And can you share how the pandemic has affected you and your fellow artists? I know for my community, I've seen the challenges for many of my neighbors who are renters, many of my frontline workers, but a lot of folks don't know what's happened in the music industry because of the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to share, and thank you again for having us. It's been very rough for myself and many others over the pandemic for obvious reasons. A lot of us make 80, 90, 100% of our income sometimes from playing. This is because the reciprocation from streaming or even selling records it isn't gonna pay the bills. So we all kind of depend on performance mainly, and with COVID, that's gone. And it's gonna be one of the last things to fully come back, because it's kind of like more people in a small space, the better, usually. So not anymore. So yeah, I mean, it was basically the hardest kind of year and a half since I started doing this professionally, I guess. Rethinking going back to finding a coffee job or, retail somewhere, because there was just no work, and the option of getting any sort of stable income from our music rather than performing it is just really not an option. So in my case, and a lot of Detroit musicians that rely on DJing and selling records themselves, DIY, in shops, through the mail, it kind of we all just resorted to essentially anything we could do, selling gear, selling our music, going to Bandcamp, because it seemed to be the only option to get anything from what we were doing. Really, it was just very, very hard for somebody who tours for 90% of my income. And it would have been a lot easier, I guess, or a lot less stressful if we knew there was some sort of system set in place where our music was actually getting us paid rather than sitting around.
No, I actually read, I think it was like over 80-something% of music is now streamed, and I know that impacts the music industry in a huge way. Heba, you're a mastering engineer and behind the scenes. I mean, can you talk a little bit about the impact. I mean, you know, Zachary talks about, you know, the system in place. I always call, those are protections. What are protections in place for folks in the industry? And if you can talk a little bit about the impact on the work and the art that you do.
Of course. Congresswoman Rashida, I'm so honored to be here. It's such a pleasure to meet you, especially as a fellow Arab American. And also I want to start off by saying R.I.P. Kay Han, the first lady of techno in Detroit, who just passed away. A true loss in our community. So what I do is I'm a mastering engineer or an audio engineer. I'm here to serve the artist. I help the artist take the album to the finish line. And being a person that serves the artist and the art, seeing the rapid erosion of the income stream for many of the artists that I work with, especially during this time when they actually need it the most, because touring is what they fall back on, because they can't make any money off of streaming, it's pretty disheartening. It is kind of in real time watching a culture kind of shrink and a bunch of people like freak out. And really, honestly, if it weren't for things like Bandcamp, basically bypassing their fees so that all the income goes straight to the artist, like artists would have been really screwed. And what does Spotify offer? They offer a tip jar, and that's all they offer. They didn't change anything about their policy. In fact, their value tripled during the one of the worst crises we've experienced in our time. So I think a lot of people don't realize that musicians are not protected by anything. There are no unions. There are no agencies that protect recording studios, people like me, who are kind of the infrastructure around the artist. And this is, the reason why you start to see very important cultural heritage sites, like important recording studios or mastering studios, literally shutting down in New York and in Detroit and in Chicago. Like, we're watching our culture like disappear because people are becoming more and more insular in the way they make music because they're trying to cut down costs. So what ends up happening is they try to figure out how to do it all themselves. They can't have band members anymore. They have to tour on their own whenever they can, whenever that's allowed, because they can't split a fraction of a penny amongst 5 different people. So the way we're making music is changing. And of course, budgets are shrinking, and eventually, it's all going to be just insular, a way of making music, and there's nothing protecting that. So it's very shocking and disheartening and saddening to see this happening. And at the same time, the streaming companies like Spotify just being like, hey, just make more music, make more content. Like, do you have any idea what goes into, the making of a record? No, you don't, because you're a tech company. You are not a music company. You are after the data. You are after serving, certain partners like major labels or multinational global hedge fund companies or getting investments. It's not about the music. The music itself is an afterthought. It has become so devalued to free. And this is how we're treating our what keeps us going, like, in the day. Like, can you imagine a day without music? Like, I couldn't. So that's it's angry.
I know. And Heba, honestly, and people don't realize, folks think this music is just like some things that people down aside. I mean, it's your career, but it's also providing this, for many are using it for all kinds of ways to heal during the pandemic, and kind of turning to music even more than ever. And, I want to, go to you, Julia. I mean, for me, I'm a policy wonk. I'm in Congress as an organizer that loves to make policy about really people and trying to alleviate any pain and suffering. But I was really shocked to hear that a survey that was done that 40% of artists have no health insurance whatsoever. And, thinking about this pandemic and everything that's happening, I mean, just, it sounds incredibly scary. And so can you talk a little bit about, the struggle and why a lot of you are really moving towards unionization and towards really coming together against the industry that is obviously pushed and motivated by corporate greed versus really cherishing this beautiful art?
I mean, last year, kind of like Shigeto and Heba already said, but last year really brought into focus for me and my like music community what the problems and inequities of streaming. And I heard about UMAW, Union of Musicians and Allied Workers, right around this time. And I had actually, like, I had been wondering, I mean, so as Heba and Shigeto said, this all came into focus last year, obviously because of COVID, specifically because musicians make most of their income from touring, because a lot of musicians don't pay a lot of attention to streaming income because it just is not very substantial. And selling records isn't what it was, obviously, decades ago. So, I still download music, but a lot of people don't. I still like, you know, having a physical object or downloading or something, having the music in some way. But I'm not against streaming, but it's just about like, what is streaming? And I think that's the question that a lot of people are starting to ask. And so I had been touring, like I actually had been touring a lot before COVID. And so I guess it's just been a shock for musicians to not suddenly not be able to tour. I mean, it's still hard. People are starting to tour now, but you know, there's all these question marks and not clear if you're safe to do it. If you like the amount of money like that you have to put up front for a tour, like to get flights, and if you have musicians, there's just so much you're responsible for. And I was fortunate that I was not setting up a tour last year, but talked to anyone who was, and it's probably just so devastating. If you had to cancel everything. And so anyway, I've learned a lot. I've learned finally more about streaming the past year, and it's been very illuminating. And I think that it's also very interesting for musicians to get together and talk about these things, because often, at least in my world, no one did talk about, oh, actually, how am I getting paid from streaming? Like, what's going on here?
I really appreciate that, because I think people don't realize, they think, oh, somebody just books you and come in. They don't realize there's a whole tour, there's a whole process. It's not like, you know, again, I think it's been really eye-opening to learn from Joey and others about what is actually happening behind the scenes. I mean, we only see the joy and the beauty of what you all produce, but we don't see what it takes to actually get it done. And, you know, Joey, I know that when you're not playing, I believe it with the Downtown Boys, you're a labor organizer and co-founder of UMAW. Can you tell us about because I know Julia's talking about streaming versus downloading, and again, people don't know the difference. I think she's absolutely right. But can you talk about the Justice Spotify campaign and what your demands are?
Yes, thanks so much. Thanks so much, Congresswoman, for meeting with us. Yeah, we started Union of Musicians and Allied Workers kind of right when COVID hit. I think a lot of us as independent musicians have been talking about the need to work collectively to build power in this industry for a long time. Because, you know, we're talking about how bad it is right now, but you all know the music industry has always had these inequities and these problems in it, which have only gotten worse and worse, as we've seen with the rest of the U.S. economy, right? That inequality has just gotten worse. More and more of the money is going to the you know, top 1% of 1%. And so we've been talking a while about the need to get some counterweight to that, to actually organize as artists, because we did not have something to represent us as independent musicians or musicians with a lot of employers, right? So right when COVID hit, we started emailing and kind of started UMAW out of the crisis of COVID, realizing, hey, we are being decimated by this, as my colleagues are all saying here, right? Music was always hard, and then we just fell off a cliff. because all performance income went away, and these streaming services, although they kept making money, none of that was going to us to compensate for that loss of income. So we all started talking, with UMAW. We got together. We first had some demands around getting musicians and music workers extended unemployment benefits, which of course we did, joined with many other types of workers to get freelance 1099 workers, those expanded unemployment benefits, which was, to be honest, the only thing keeping myself and a lot of other musicians, paying rent and eating throughout this pandemic. But then our first campaign we launched is, as you mentioned, Justice at Spotify campaign. And the reason we targeted Spotify for our first big campaign is because we looked around and said, hey, where is all the money going in this industry? Because there is a lot of money in this industry. The record recording industry has grown every year for the last 6 years. A big misconception that music isn't making money. It's making a lot of money right now. It's just all going to a few tech companies, to a few CEOs, to a few major labels in the music industry. And we're looking around and saying, upwards of 80% of the music industry is streaming. Spotify is by far the biggest player in the streaming game. No one is running a campaign on them. We need to get together collectively and run a campaign to get resources, to get power back from what we see as our biggest employer, which is the biggest player in the streaming industry, which is the biggest piece of the pie in the music industry, right? And we looked around and said during the pandemic, Spotify tripled in value, while according to a UN report on streaming that just came out, the per stream rate has actually decreased over 2020. So you think about that biggest crisis for musicians ever. This company's tripled in value, and they actually decreased the wages they're paying to artists to around a third of a cent, and down from there. So we launched this campaign, recognizing how desperate the situation was. And what we were demanding of Spotify was, number one, pay us at least 1 cent per stream. Now, we put this out, and a lot of people said, oh my God, that they're not paying you that? And he said, yes, it's a third of a cent, and it's decreasing every year.
I actually think it's so powerful, the 1 cent, because it actually shows that they pay you nothing.
Yeah.
It's like, it starts the conversation, wait, that means you're not getting paid anything. But no, I'm sorry, but Joey, keep going.
Yeah, it's shocking. And we took, inspiration from a lot of the rest of the labor movement to think of that, of saying, fight for 15, these other movements, and saying, no, we got to say a benchmark, a minimum for what we want to pay. Obviously, we'd like to make more, but we need at least 1 cent per stream. And we can talk about ways we think we can get there, but we think there are many ways we can get there. Number two is to adopt a user-centric payment model. This gets a little wonky with what this means, but essentially when you listen to a song on Spotify, that money is not going from your stream. Even that third of a cent, that's not going to the artist. It's going into a big pool, and then Spotify pays out the amount of money based on the percentage of total streams that an artist gets. So studies have shown that ultimately this system favors the very top 1% of 1% of artists, and overwhelmingly favors major label artists. So it's a bit deceptive to consumers, and it's again favoring that very, very top of the industry. Number three, we're asking to make all their closed door contracts public. So a lot of how streaming works, like a lot of tech economics, right? It's very murky, very mysterious, a lot of behind the scenes stuff, and there's not a lot of regulation against these companies. So we don't even really know how a lot of, Spotify's algorithms work, how their data collection works, all that stuff. So we want them to be transparent. Number four, we're asking them to reveal existing payola systems. So for those of you who don't know, payola refers to how, radio used to work, where you could pay a radio DJ for them to play a song on the radio. Congress eventually made that illegal to do unless the radio station discloses it. But online with streaming, it's actually still legal. And we know Spotify and other streaming services, all these systems in place where the major labels can essentially game the algorithm to prioritize the very, very top, richest artists. And they're launching these new programs called Discovery Mode, where they're actually encouraging smaller artists. They're saying, hey, tiny artists, if you accept even less money per stream, we'll give you priority in the algorithm. So they're very directly, in a number of ways, encouraging payola, encouraging this race to the bottom, and we need that to end. Number 5, credit all labor on recording. So this is referring to people like Heba, like mastering engineers, all of this host of people who go in to putting labor into a recording, which streaming services often just erase. They don't even list that labor, which is an enormous amount of labor, which doesn't get compensated, but doesn't even get acknowledged or credited, right? And finally, we're asking them to end legal battles intended to further impoverish artists. So despite paying such little royalty payments, Spotify has actually engaged in suing artist rights and songwriter groups to lower these royalty rates even further, okay? So we're calling them out on that and demanding that they stop that. So we sent out these 6 central demands, and we have other ideas about Spotify. These are kind of our key demands that we think everything should be built off of. And we quickly got around 30,000 artists signed on to this thing, and that continues to grow. This past March, we had in-person collective actions at Spotify offices all over the world. First time music workers have ever taken this kind of collective action. So it's a really big, inspiring campaign, and so many people participating, I think, speaks to the anger music workers are feeling and the need to change this.
Yeah, I read somewhere they've made billions of dollars during this pandemic. I mean, we've heard of many of certain industries as people were dying and suffering and getting sick. Certain industries continue to make record profits with these broken systems that leaves people out or in many ways don't, because they're not paying their fair share in what you all are producing and what many of my residents and neighbors produce when they're on the front lines. But please, I really want to hear about, the need. I know you've been very passionate about the need for copyright laws to be updated.
Yeah, I mean, these copyright laws are like 70 years old. I mean, streaming has never been classified under legislation. That is why you have a situation where, these streaming tech companies like Spotify can come in and like literally do whatever they want. Like, they are so powerful that they could do whatever they want, and artists are kind of forced by hand to kind of succumb to their to their moves. And as a result, it's like, it really affects everyone, and there's like a trickle down effect where you like I was saying earlier, it just kind of really changes the way artists produce music, and how artists can't be devoted to their art because of the lack of legislation, and they have to obviously do many other jobs just to like break even or make ends meet, when in the past they were able to make money off of their records, but now it's like literally getting peanuts for their very hard labor. Like, it costs a lot of money to make a record. A great sounding record, it costs a lot of money. It's not free to make a record. And when on the receiving end, the streaming companies are putting out these records, like, they're almost free because they do have a free tier, and we're not even really privy to how much money they make off of that, because all that stuff is very heavily shrouded in the way, like, sort of no one can really say, like, okay, how does the breakdown of a stream go about? Like, breaking it down, like, no one can really answer that question. And even like asking the question, like, what is a stream? How do you classify a stream? Is it a sale or is it a license? And of course, this is something we need to talk about. Like, in the past, like, you could own your records, you could own a physical product, and the money goes directly from the make of this record to the pocket of the people that made it. But now the stream is like, you don't own the music, you're licensing it. And that's why it was really amazing to see on the other side of the pond in the UK, the House of Commons, creating their investigation, and really major artists, people like Nile Rodgers, like, questioning, what is a stream? How do you classify a stream? So yeah, it is really important to get all of these copyright laws updated, because very few number of people benefit off of the way the system is. Like, I think it's 0.2% of the entire industry make $50K and above. Everybody else makes below that. And
I saw an average of, like, I think it was like 21,000, 22,000. Yeah.
It's pathetic. It's pathetic, and they are
like immoral. It's like so inhumane, because I can't imagine. I mean, you're literally on the road. You're literally, I mean, just constantly trying to perfect everything.
The UN document that came out, they classified the situation as a human rights violation. So I think it's really important to underline that.
So, you know, Shigeto, I don't know if you can help also, you know, one of the things I'm hearing, and I know we want to talk about neighboring rights movement and everything, piggybacking on what Heba's talking about. But it's really important, I think, with everything that I always do in fighting against poverty, corporate greed, is that human face. Shigeto, I want you to talk, like, what is the human face to this? Like, what does it feel like? Because you all are family. You all are these beings in your community, not just these entertainers. You know what I mean? I know, me being in Congress, sometimes there's always a, you know, there's always like, intentional or not, this kind of humanization that happens, like, this is who you are, but you're not, you're also a son, you know,
Yeah.
a neighbor, somebody, you know, and I just really think it's important to put that human face to what it means as you as a person, that this is happening, because this is what you love, this is what you're passionate about, but you can't seem to have human dignity in this space because of corporate greed.
It is very, I think, ever present in Detroit, this sort of dynamic of the real face behind the art that can't push through and is struggling. Detroit is, I'm honored to even be here right now speaking with all of you, because to even represent a demographic of musicians in any way like that, for me, is huge. As we said at the beginning, it's the home of so much: Motown, jazz, techno, hip hop. Let's keep going. But these people here, these artists, are, you know, they're not just younger folks like us. A lot of these artists are veterans of this culture. They're in their 40s, 50s, older. And Detroit is very protective of that culture and weary of the world that's formed around it, the structure that we talk about. And, you know, these guys and gals, everybody that I've seen throughout the pandemic here, are really resorting to anything they can do musically just to pay the rent. And these are, you know, veterans of this music, like people that shouldn't be struggling anyway, I feel like, even if they're not playing shows, because of their impact. And, you know, I see them streaming or selling their records or going to people asking if they can put anything out. And it's like, half of these musicians have enough catalog to constantly be selling music, and enough fans that if they trusted Spotify, like, and they got a penny per stream, it could be actually sustainable income for them. And another pandemic could hit and they could just create and it would be okay. But this is everyone. I mean, like 90% of the people I know are DJs or artists in Detroit, or they work in the service industry and are trying to make this happen. And the main source, which is Spotify, like you said, the biggest piece of the pie, our biggest employer, is essentially a joke that is just exploiting everyone, and creating a dynamic where the biggest part of the structure is just not trusted at all. I mean, it's kind of like, sorry to bring it here, but it's kind of like police and how they're supposed to protect the communities, and we're in a position right now in the country where a lot of us don't feel safe. And a lot of us in Detroit will call our neighbor or call our landlord before we call the cops. And that's because we don't feel listened to or seen.
No,
And that's why
you want to feel protected.
yeah, we want to feel
be in
protected.
this industry, you want to feel protected. You're in the
Yeah.
workplace, you want to feel protected.
Yeah.
You know,
and the fact is our music is not protected. Our art is not protected at all.
Which
in fact, it's stolen.
Yeah. And you know, Shigeto, like, it's actually so connected with our quality of life, with our, you know, dignity. I mean, all of it is so connected, and it really does impact, I think, so many people when folks continue to try to gaslight us to believe that this is just how it just has to be always. This is just how it is. But trust me, in this city, every corner is a reminder that no matter who's in the White House, no matter who's in Congress, no matter who's in power, that the people really do have an incredible way of shifting folks to understand that something unjust needs to be completely changed. And so people power movement, as Grace Lee Boggs would say, that consciousness, awakeness in the streets and the community is what actually leads to meaningful change. Again, not of who is in these places, but how collectively people come together and demand more. I know I want to kind of wrap up, and, you know, I think, Joey, if you can just leave folks with, like, what can they do to support you all? They love your art. They love what you all are doing. Like, what can somebody, like, I know I'm a member of Congress. I know exactly what I need to do, but I want, you know, that layperson that's kind of listening and for the first time saying, I didn't know this was happening to Joey or Julia or Shigeto or Heba, you know, like, I didn't know this was happening. How can I support them?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks so much for asking. I mean, on a direct level of supporting artists, you can go and purchase artist stuff directly, whether via their labels, their own websites, on Bandcamp, right? You can purchase artist merch at bandcamp.com, search for your artist. Probably Artist has a site there where you can download their stuff or buy merch from them. Those are great ways to support. Go out when it's safe to do so and support people playing live. Again, that's how we make money on this stuff. And then you can also support our collective organizing. If you yourself are a music worker, go to unionofmusicians.org, sign up, join our efforts there. Join the Justice at Spotify campaign, support legislation, right? We kind of started talking about neighboring rights, performance rights, right? There's a piece of legislation in Congress right now called the American Music Fairness Act, which many groups are asking people to call their representatives to support. This is an act that will give artists royalties for music that is played on the radio. Another wild thing about the recording industry that a lot of people don't realize, when you hear stuff on the radio, those performers are not getting paid for that. We're perhaps one of the only countries on earth that does it this way. But our radio royalty rates are totally out of whack, have not been updated in a long time. That needs to change. And you can support our efforts to change how streaming regulation works, right? According to the UN report that came out, according to the UK Parliament report that recently came out, we need to create a new streaming royalty that's going to be paid directly to artists. The old regulations, old ways of working copyright for this are broken. They're impoverishing artists, they're destroying music. To support our efforts to get a new streaming royalty, to launch an inquiry into streaming like they did in the UK, we need these things here. So get out there, support artists directly with your money, with your support, and then join these collective efforts to make real change that's going to make this industry sustainable.
Anything else that you'd like to discuss or think that your, you know, music fans should know?
I'd like to add that, like, you know, the American public needs to realize that, like, the music industry is one of our greatest exports, and we're treating it like it's not. And that's why it's like, it's so crucial for policymakers to start looking into the situation, because when artists start to get paid properly again, it's going to invigorate the economy. It's not just a cultural thing. Like, artists will have money again, venues will be able to open up again, we'll have studios and, you know, revived again. We'll have more people within the community coming back in instead of going more and more into this insular way of working. And I think it's, you know, it is like a not just a cultural problem, it's like an economic problem. And it actually like extends beyond, because, you know, I work with artists from like, you know, from the Middle East and Ramallah all the way to, you know, Japan. And it's like, these are the people that get screwed over the most by these policies, like the way the streaming works. So yeah, I just wanted to add that.
No, definitely. And I mean, you talk about the global impact as well, not just here at home in the United States.
I feel like I could say one thing.
Go for it.
I kind of just wanted to bring some stuff all together, because there was so much stuff that everyone was saying. It was like making me think, and it's what I'm going to say is just kind of general, but like I spent quite a bit of time outside of Detroit in college, studying music, not in Detroit, but in Ann Arbor. And I did go to, I realized as Shigeto was speaking that every time I'd go to Detroit, often it was for music, whether to play music there or to see music, into the opera, or to see like classical music, symphony, or to perform at the Trumbleplex. I performed there, or to play at, and I have friends that live there and at the Trumbleplex, or played at all kinds of places. And so to me, just like, I live mostly, I'm based in LA though, most of my life, and just all of this stuff, especially that Heba has been emphasizing about, you know, communities of music and the importance of these communities here in LA. This is a concern, and in any city, in any town or whatever, this is such a an important thing for creativity, that you have local communities making music. And of course now with the internet, things are changing, but this is so crucial. And why is it, like Shigeto points out, that so few musicians, including myself, very few musicians I know really are even putting their music on Spotify, because why is it that so many musicians are that are kind of more creative musicians are avoiding Spotify? And so what we need to make this, there is a better way. Like, they don't have to be avoiding streaming. Like, streaming can be made functional. And I just want to emphasize these basic points, that as you said, Representative Tlaib, Spotify tripled in valuation to $66.9 billion during COVID, while musicians were experiencing economic devastation. Major labels who make special closed-door deals with streaming companies are earning approximately $1 million per hour from streaming services. So as Joy pointed out, there's music and there is money in streaming. And meanwhile, the average rate per stream for artists is only 0.0038. And that number is decreasing. And for musicians on a label, if you have a label, it's more likely to be 0.0007 per stream. And polls in the UK and Sweden reveal that 1 in 3 musicians are planning to quit their profession. So we just need to think about, and like, do we want music to be, as the UN report points out, do we want music to be a thing that only the wealthy can enjoy? And that music will just become like, one question, there's a quote, "One question for policymakers is whether creators in all categories are to become hobbyists out of necessity due to the streaming imbalance." So is that what we want our music to be? Just like, so that's all.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I don't even think of it as functional. Like, it needs to be equitable. And I love that you all are also thinking about the fact that you want your listeners to be from all backgrounds, all income class. I mean, you want it to be accessible to everyone, not those that just have. So thank you again, everyone, for your insight and work on this really important issue. Thank you for helping put that human face, I think, behind the beautiful music and what you all produce. I want you to know, I mean, one of the things about being where I'm at is really the power to convene and elevate movement work. So because people want to do the right thing, they want to support efforts like this. They just got to know about it.